In January of 1868, a freed slave who was also a pastor and cobbler, Reverend William Handy, bought a part of lot number 345 containing 9 2/4 acres of land west of what was then called Fish Trap Road, which is now Irvin Avenue, on what is now Beale Street in the western suburbs of Florence. Reverend Handy purchased the land from Mrs. Mary J. Asher. Thus, Reverend Handy was the first African-American man to own property on what became known soon thereafter as Handy's Hill in West Florence. William Handy's grandson, W.C. Handy, William Christopher Handy, would leave Handy's Hill in 1892 and go on to become a world-renowned musician and the celebrated father of the blues. W.C. Handy was himself in part shaped and molded by the experiences of his family and ancestors and was justly proud of them. Reverend William Handy was born a slave around 1811 in Princess Anne in Somerset County, Maryland, and with 2 brothers escaped the plantation in Princess Anne via the Underground Railroad. One brother escaped to Canada, another to some portion of the East. However, William Handy was caught and subsequently sold to Bernard McKiernan's Spring Hill Plantation in what was then Franklin County, Alabama, but is now Colbert County. Of course, the two Colbert separated from Franklin in 1867. Reverend Handy was married twice and is believed to have had 9 children by his first slave wife, Milka. At some point, one of Reverend Handy's sons, Hanson Handy, was sold by Bernard McKiernan into Arkansas and never heard from again. Reverend William Handy was married twice and is believed to have had 9 children by his first slave wife, Milka, one of whom was the Reverend Charles Bernard Handy, born in 1848, who died after 1910, who was the father of W.C. Handy. Another of those children, a son, Hanson Handy, was sold by Bernard McKiernan into slavery in Arkansas and never heard from again. Reverend Handy had 3 children by his second wife, Themutis, who was born in sometime around 1827 and died after 1880. Those children were Lucy, Ellen, and Lewis. Some of the Handys remained in what became Colbert County after the end of slavery, while William Handy moved his family to Florence after his ordination as an AME pastor in Murfreesboro, Tennessee in 1865, where he took up the trade of shoemaker. And W.C. Handy says that his grandpa, William Handy, founded the Hopewell AME Church near St. Florian. One really interesting, fascinating story about Reverend Handy while he was a slave on the McKiernan Spring Hill Plantation involves a New Jersey slave named Peter Still. Peter Still was a New Jersey free person of color, meaning someone who was not a slave, but was kidnapped as a child and sold into slavery in Kentucky, then sold to Bernard McKiernan's Spring Hill Plantation a few miles east of Tuscumbia in what was then still a part of Franklin County, Alabama. With the help of the Jewish freedmen brothers of Tuscumbia, Peter Still purchased his freedom from Bernard McKiernan. Handy's paternal grandfather, William Handy, who was a McKiernan slave, helped abolitionist Seth Conklin attempt to rescue Still's wife and slave children from Spring Hill in 1853. However, they were captured in Indiana and sent back to Franklin County with Bernard McKiernan. Luckily, Peter Still was able to raise enough money through donations and contributions that he raised among abolitionists in the North to buy the freedom of his wife and children, so they did not have to remain slaves at Spring Hill. Tuscumbia native Kate R. Pickard chronicled the story in her 1856 book, The Kidnapped and the Ransomed. According to W.C. Handy in his autobiography, Father of the Blues, the only truly musically inclined person in his family had been his grandpa Brewer, who we'll talk about in a future episode. As for his other grandfather, William Handy, Handy commented that his grandfather Handy, quote, hadn't even sown any musical wild oats, unquote. So being a Methodist pastor, Reverend Handy was a little bit more down to earth and maybe what we would call even straight-laced than Handy's paternal grandfather, Christopher Brewer. And Handy seems to have been very well regarded and respected in the community of Florence, so that, if I can find it, Reverend William Handy died in October of 1873, and the Florence Times-Journal ran his obituary, which read, quote, When William Handy, the colored preacher of the Methodist Church, departed this life on last Friday, a good man was to the unknown born. Since 1867, he has lived in Florence, and by his humble, consistent conduct, he won and retained the goodwill of all persons white and black. The largest funeral procession observed this year followed his remains to the grave, and that he might rest in peace was the prayer of all who knew him, unquote. So the obituary of a very highly respected African-American pastor and shoemaker, and the grandfather of William Christopher Handy, Reverend William Wise Handy. These musicians are proudly standing sentinel next to the W.C. Handy Home and Museum here on West College Street. Interesting fact about the cabin, it's not all of the original cabin. It's actually a composite of several old cabins, the pieces of which they gathered from all over Lauderdale County, Alabama, to try to recreate the original cabin and what it looked like in the 1870s. And they'll tell you this if you get the tour. You know, they've never tried to disguise that at all. Which brings up, if you have a chance to go see the museum, please come to the museum and get the tour. They've got a lot of really cool and fascinating artifacts from the life of W.C. Handy, some rare one-of-a-kind items that you won't see anywhere else. And the tour guides are very knowledgeable and very helpful, and you will really enjoy getting the tour. Also, stay tuned for other episodes in the life of William Christopher W.C. Handy. This is part 1. We plan on breaking his life and his Northwest Alabama origins up into several video episodes, so that this will be part 1 of a series. So if you like this one, stay tuned. We plan on doing some more on his Northwest Alabama origins. And as always, if you like what you see, like us on YouTube. You may think about becoming a YouTube subscriber to our YouTube channel. Thanks.